I'm Corinne Schaefer, and welcome to Create Outside the Box. In this episode, I will be speaking with visual artist Mary Ann McKay about how you can find success at every stage of life, being a multidisciplinary artist, and how her art gives voice to those from the past. If you're interested in watching our conversation, please visit our Creative Operations YouTube channel under the playlist Create Outside the Box. Mary Ann McKay began her professional fine art career shortly after relocating to South Jersey in 1976. She began painting under her first mentor, Pat Witt, at the Barnes Studio of Art in 1979, thus beginning a friendship that remains an important part of her life today. In 1982, she began studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art Evening School for life painting and drawing. After this, she enrolled at the Husson School of Art for graphic design, always finding time for a painting class. During these years, she became interested in portraits and took extra time in classes to refine her technique. She discovered she had a natural ability to capture a mood or the personality in her subjects. After a successful career in graphic design, Mary Ann moved to Cliffwood Beach, New Jersey to be near the water and plan for retirement, where she now creates art every day. Mary Ann also served as the president of the Art Society of Keyport, where she helped direct and create public glass mosaic art for the borough of Keyport. Mary Ann exhibits her work in several venues and has been a part owner of Art Space 88, an art gallery in Keyport, New Jersey. She now works in her studio in New Jersey. So hello, Mary Ann, and welcome to Create Outside the Box. Thank you so much for speaking with me this morning.
Yes, thank you. On this lovely rainy day, right?
I know, it is so gray. It looks like evening, but it's actually the morning here.
I know.
But we met almost a year ago through a mutual friend, Asia Jung, who we've had on the show. And she just introduced me to a whole group of really wonderful people, including yourself. And I'm just so grateful to have met you and to have learned more about you. And I'm hoping in this conversation that more people can learn more about you and your art.
Thank you. It's great being here. And, thanks to Asia, whom we now all call our social director. She has introduced me to so many interesting people over the last few years, including herself.
Yeah.
I mean, she's amazing. She's a great artist and a good friend.
She is.
She's totally a good friend to everyone. And, she loves people. It's obvious. So anyway, I'm glad she's brought us all together. She's starting another group, with studio tours now. And that'll be fun, because we know these other artists. We've known them. We've been seeing their work. And it's good to have some kind of connection. Mm-hmm. I don't think any artist really, even though we work alone now, I wasn't used to it.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get used to working just totally by myself, even though I did it. I had two jobs most of my career, which was a graphic designer. I was a single parent and, had a career and I worked two jobs.
Yeah.
I always did it. So I was used to that, but I was also used to a community. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that we have that now. And I'm glad they include you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it's so true. And this is a topic that's brought up in a lot of the conversations that I have, is this idea of collaboration over competition, and that it's really important to build a community and to build a safe space where artists from different disciplines can be safe to talk about their experiences and to bounce ideas off of. And I think, a lot of times there's this stereotype that everything needs to be competitive and cutthroat and all of this stuff. And it really doesn't need to be that way. No. And we grow so much more as artists and individuals when we're open and collaborative.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah. But speaking of things that shape us, like good relationships and community, you were born and raised in Pittsburgh. And I was interested in how that shaped you as a person and as an artist.
First of all, I wasn't. I was born in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
That's right. That's right. You did correct me and I forgot.
Yeah, that's all right. Pittsburgh is okay too. Pittsburgh is now a really cool place to retire,
Yes.
but I don't want to leave my family and friends at this point. But yes, being born in Hershey during World War II was an amazing experience for my friends and family. And all of my family worked at some point at the Hershey Corporation. My mother, my father, my grandparents, my uncles, everybody. So when I was about 9 years old, then we moved to Harrisburg. My father got another job and we moved to Harrisburg and then to the Midwest and then to New Jersey. So, I mean, like a lot of people, I've lived in different places and had wonderful experiences, really. Living in Hershey, Pennsylvania is an amazing experience because we never knew a depression.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hershey saw to that.
Wow.
He did all kind of things for the community and for his workers, like Hershey Park was built for the workers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, originally. Oh, my sister and I were contacted by historians in Hershey because my grandmother worked for Mr. Hershey. I don't want to get started and go off track with this, but my grandmother worked for Mr. Hershey.
Wow.
And so they were trying to find people who knew him. And somewhere in the archives of my sister's pile of photos, she has a picture of me with him.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Well, we'll have to have a follow-up,
We'll have another conversation, but, and that's where I had my first artistic experience was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania with my friend Marisa, who's still my best friend.
Now, you kind of started a little bit about how you were working 2 jobs. You were a single mother. You've moved to all of these different states. You've had such an interesting life. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was preparing for this interview was, society and life sometimes puts pressure on us that we need to have our career path and all of our successes. We need to achieve all of those things early in life in order to be successful. And when I think of you and your career path and your life, you've proven all of that wrong. And you've also proven that if we believe in that pressure, if we believe in those stereotypes, that we can actually limit ourselves and limit what we're truly able to achieve. So with all of that in mind, because you came into your career in the fine arts a little bit later in life, like what motivated you to do that and to get into the fine arts?
That's easy. I've always liked to paint and draw when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, in high school. Forget high school. Our high school was geared toward the sciences and languages, which I'm grateful for now. But when I moved back from the Midwest to New Jersey, my neighbor across the street invited me to come with her to a painting class. And that led me to my dear friend today, who is 95, I think, 95, 96, Pat Witt. She encouraged me to move on. She saw what I could do and encouraged me to take classes in Philadelphia at the Academy of Fine Art. And I did that at night. I took evening classes. I had 3 children.
Wow.
I couldn't go back to school full time. However, when the last child was 3 years old, he went to nursery school and I went back to school. I started, I knew I needed a career. Fine art painting wasn't going to be it. So I started thinking I would be a graphic designer, and that's what I did. I went to design school. I went to Hushin School of Art.
I want to unpack that a little bit because there are a lot of points there that I want to kind of get into. And we began the conversation talking about a good friend, Asia, and how she's brought the community together and how that can be inspirational. But you brought up your good friend and mentor, Pat Witt. And I just thought maybe we can discuss a little bit more, why that friendship and mentorship is so important to you and how that's been influential.
Anyone who knows her, she lives in Millville, New Jersey. She has macular degeneration now and doesn't hear very well. So when I go and visit her, I have to do things sideways and really speak loudly to her. But she still has every bit of her senses and she still paints.
Yeah.
She
Wow.
gets up and 5 o'clock in the morning, she still does it, but she has struggled for years to maintain a teaching position with other students. And she has so many hundreds and hundreds of successful artists who attribute their successes to her.
Mm-hmm.
How she pushed us and shoved us and yelled at us if we weren't doing something right. But she's an amazing person, and I love her dearly. But she said you should really start going to school. So go to the academy, which is where she graduated from in Philadelphia. So I started going. And then she said, Hushin has a great reputation for people who are going into the graphic arts to have a career. And all those years I did it full time, I still worked and had a family.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but you know what? I did it. I was in my 40s. It was me and all the young kids, but it was an amazing experience. I learned a lot. And during all that time, I always took a fine art class. In spite of all the paste up classes and all the design and advertising classes, I had to have a fine art, usually a drawing, painting.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't let that go.
You needed to have that balance.
I needed to have that balance. And switching to graphic design wasn't always easy for me. I knew nothing about typography and paste up, but I learned. I learned the basic way. And in the midst of it all, my senior year, the Macintosh came on the scene. And I took to it like, I'm right, left brain. I'm one of those rare people that can switch.
Mm-hmm.
So the computer to me was another tool for my fine art and my graphic design. And that was the success of my career was my computer design skills.
So in discussing how, obviously, graphic design is more computer oriented, more tech oriented than the visual arts. That's an obvious difference between the two. And we've discussed, again, you have this ability to switch between
I do. So a friend of mine did a test on me and she said, "Oh my God, you're right down the middle." I said, but I use it now, even in my fine art. If I'm stuck on something, I'll run it into Photoshop and play with it somewhat there. You probably saw it when you came to my studio. I'll have a Photoshop picture hanging on the wall. Well, this is the way I saw it. It's another tool. And it helped me in my career because I knew about color theory and fine art and balance and spatial relationships. And all of that now is on the Macintosh. But I still want to hold those brushes and paint. It's what I do.
So very much like your personality, which is balanced, your art is also balanced between these two forms because when you don't necessarily think of them as separate, you have an idea and you have a concept and you're just going, I'm going to use all of the tools in my toolbox.
And that's what I do. That's exactly what I do. Which tool am I going to use today? And I was concerned about that at some point after I started doing different things with my art, like applying it with mixed media and metal. And then I was concerned that maybe I'm switching gears too quickly or I don't stick with anything. I get bored very quickly. So I might paint one day and then do a mixed media with metal and glass the next day. But I have a dear friend who's a sociology professor, and he said, well, you just embrace that because not everybody can do it. So when you go to my website, you'll see about 4 or 5 different categories. I had to separate them. And then that's what I do. And it's very rewarding, I think, to be able to, gee, what am I going to do today kind of thing.
Yeah. And what I love is it's a reflection of who you are because your story has been, okay, I'm not going to let anybody put me in a box. I'm not going to let anybody dictate exactly. I'm going to kind of go off on my own path and do my own thing. And, even with your art, embracing that and embracing who you are leads you to your own unique voice. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to have the courage to do that because we think that we need to, for our brand or to be successful or for people to know what to do with us, we need to put ourselves in those boxes, but we don't need to. We can be free. We can be limitless.
Right. That's exactly how I feel. And thus came the term multidisciplinary. My partner's daughter is one of those artists. She does web design for the Library of Congress. And then she also she can paint like a Renaissance master. And she can also do installations. And she knows how to wire a circuit board because, her father's an engineer. So he taught her how to wire a circuit board. So she can do all of these things. And so, I sort of borrowed her term, multidisciplinary.
Yep.
So we always have a lot to talk about. I could never wire a circuit board because I'm not good with tools, but maybe I could.
One of the, it's funny, we're talking about things that are very forward, as far as combining things and technology, but you are very well known for your portraits, which is a much more traditional art form. Of course, you don't do it in a traditional manner.
Sometimes I do. I am now, actually.
Mm-hmm. What drew you to portraits? What excites you about that?
People. Just people. When I meet a person for the first time, I'm scanning their face and I remember it. I know it's a weird thing, but I often don't look at their eyes first. I look at their smile because I think the mouth tells you everything. Yes, the eyes are the portrait of the soul or whatever they say about it. But I remember faces, and I'm always like, when I go to a movie, for example, oh, I remember that actor. That actor was so-and-so and so-and-so. And Mort said, my God, how do you remember that? Because I remember faces. And I'm interested in faces and the expressions people have. I know that expression is the eyes are the windows of the soul, and that's really true. And in my drawing classes, I was told that I have the ability to get that expression in the eyes. Mm. And so I started really doing portraits on and off for many years. I've given them away. I've sold them. I've had commissions for them. But then I got away from it. I learned that I loved landscapes. I was immersed in my graphic design, working 2 jobs. That took a lot of my time. But now with my coal mine series, I went back into painting portraits again. I painted 7 of them all in a row. And I realized just how much I did love that. So then I started designing the faces of these children by doing them with different, I'd say different media. Mm-hmm. Like glass, I did them in glass. I did them in paint. I did them in metal. But I wanted their faces. I wanted people to see the faces of the children and understand the traumas and the hardships that they had. And I could only do that by showing faces.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about this because, again, you are an artist that, you are a multidisciplinarian. You have so many different topics, but you are also a visual storyteller and a visual historian.
Yeah.
And you brought up the coal miner children. You also have a series that explores the children that were working in the glass blowing factories. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously extremely important to you to bring these stories forward and to give voice to the voiceless. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak a little bit about why this is so important to you.
Right. I can speak about that forever. I mean, you'll have to rein me in because when I'm writing an artist statement for these series, they want to know the why and the how. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell them about the how. That's easy, but the why goes a lot deeper. It delves into my own ancestry of being Ukrainian German and trying to find my roots, because I learned from my father, if you know where you've been, you can finally figure out where you're going. But then if I quote my mentor, Pat Witt, she says, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And she's 96. So I quote her a lot also, but I do want to know about my heritage. It's important to me somehow. It's difficult to find. My Ukrainian side is very difficult because of the borders shifting the way they did. My grandfather never speaking English. So that's what got me started with these coal mine children, because he was a coal miner. Mm-hmm. Came from Ukraine in his early 20s, married my grandmother, who I still cannot find any record of, except on the birth certificates of her children. That's it. I know nothing about her except where she's buried. She died in the original pandemic of 1918 with my father's little brother. So we make a pilgrimage at least once a year or so to Pottsville, Centralia, Pennsylvania, where she's buried in the Ukrainian Catholic Church cemetery there. But that led me into recognizing in my research these children that worked in the coal mines. And I'm from Pennsylvania, and we drove up to the coal mines all the time when I was little to visit my grandfather. And so I grew up knowing that I had Ukrainian relatives, and we were close, a close family, still close with some of my cousins, which is another story because I recently found one right 10 minutes away from me.
Oh, that's crazy.
On Ancestry.
Oh, wow.
All right. And she is the granddaughter of one of my grandfather's cousins. Three of them came together. And so now I have like a distant cousin, but a cousin.
Yeah.
Close to me. And so that was what led me into the plight of these children. Mm-hmm. And I started researching, and I found these photos of Lewis Hine, who is my hero now. And he photographed these children in factories and coal mines and glass factories, especially in South Jersey. But the coal mines were in central Pennsylvania, and I knew about them. I never visited one until a few years ago. I was scared to death. I wouldn't want to go down there every day. No. But they did it. The children did it. They were hurt. They were harmed. Most of the jobs that the little children did were in the breaker houses, and I did many, many imageries of that. Oh, here comes the dog. She'll be here.
She's an honorary guest.
She's wondering. She's looking at the screen. She's looking at you. But the children worked in these breaker houses because their hands were small. And they were able to sort the coal from the shale and whatever debris was there. And they died young. They were hurt, maimed. They fell into the channels of coal coming in from the chutes.
Because they were put into dangerous jobs because they were small and because they had little hands. And so they gave them, the jobs of greasing the wheel or opening and closing the doors when you have these coal trains coming that are coming quickly. And can you imagine if the timing on any of these activities is
off? You remember that? Did I tell you that? Uh-huh.
I watched the video that you gave me.
That was the worst job of all. Yeah. Them falling into the chutes in the breaker house, but that coal car coming, and they had to open the door in time. And that one little boy, remember I mentioned a Shorpy. His job was greasing the wheels. And they were maimed or killed that way because there's several tons of coal in those cars. So I just started doing more and more and more research. And I started working with those photos because Lewis Hine, thank you very much, sir, did them with a big box camera, which allowed the Library of Congress to download them and have them high res and have them public domain now so that there's no right. So I started downloading them like crazy because there were so many. And so many children were really, they had to go to work, especially in the coal fields. The parents couldn't. The fathers would be injured or die very young, and the children had to go to work to help support the families. So they didn't get to school a lot either. And the same thing with the glass blowing children. They weren't injured as much or in the same way. I'm sure they were burned, or the machinery harmed them a lot. But they had to go to school during the day, and a lot of them worked at night and then went to school during the day and fell asleep.
Because there was this personal connection through your family history and your grandfather to the coal mine children. But then in finding the photos, is that what led you to want to delve into the glass blowing children and finding?
Yes, exactly. After the coal mine series, of which I did, maybe a good 40, 50 imagery, I just wanted to add my own personal take on showing their faces in different art forms. So that's what led me to, I can transfer them onto glass, or I can transfer them onto metal, which I use a lot because of the different look it has to it. It looks old and antique. And I learned to cut glass, of course, by working on the sculptures in Keyport. And so then that was fun for a while. I love cutting glass and working with glass mosaics. So I incorporated cut glass into them. And that was especially useful in the glass blowing children's series.
It's interesting to me because we're dealing with such serious and dark topics. But at the same time, when I see your work, when I see these series, it's beautiful. It's innovative. It's colorful even sometimes.
It's colorful. Oh, I love color. Yeah, of course. Most of the photos were black and white.
And I just wonder, because people could come at it from a lot of different angles. How do you come up with these concepts? Because I don't think that people would often think with these tragic, sad stories, such innovative, light, colorful works that you produce. How do you come up with that?
It all comes from what I called the series was silent voices. If these children had a voice, it would be in color, and it would be bright, and it would be happy. It wouldn't be like their lives were. I'm giving them the voice. I'm giving them the colorful life that they didn't have. And that's where I come from with it. So I'm a colorist. I don't muddle colors ever, even in my paintings, unless it's my look I'm going for. I love brilliant colors. So I can run colors on Photoshop. I can add all the bright colored paint I want to give them that. And that's where it comes from. All the photos actually are black and white or sepia. None of them were color, not back in 1910.
No.
Or 1908.
And people should also know, it's clear from the conversation that we're having, but you do extensive research. You've gone in person to these places.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
You know the names of...
I know their names. Lewis Hine has most of their names. So it's like, I know this child. I know this child. What I know his eyes. I know his face. Let me give him some kind of a life that he didn't have, or her. Now I'm working. I have an exhibit coming up. I don't know if you're ready for this topic, but I'll just mention it now. I have an exhibit coming up on Labor Day of this year at the Labor Museum in Patterson. And that's where the labor strikes were in the cotton mills. So there are many, 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 many photographs of the little children in the cotton mills. And again, I just read the other day, and it broke my heart that so many children went to work in the cotton mills, and then the fathers stayed home and loafed. Yeah. Imagine that. They had all these children. They all worked in the mills. So the children went out, and again, they had small hands. So there were children, laborers in the state of New Jersey that worked in the cranberry bogs. They, in the South Carolinas and North Carolina, they worked shucking clams because of their little hands. 5, 6 years old. I haven't even begun to do research on that yet. But when I read that they came from Philadelphia to work in the cranberry bogs, little children, that really, I was really sad about that. But I could go on and on and on because the Library of Congress, you Google Lewis Hine and you'll find out he spent years taking pictures of all these children all over the United States, pretending to sell Bibles to get into factories. That was a good one.
Because I was thinking about that. He's really putting a spotlight on child labor and all of the faults and all of the evilness around it. So how did he get in? So it's so good to know that he did have a God.
Well, he did. He was interested in it. He was a school teacher. I have his biography and I use it a lot. I always give him credit for everything because it is because of him that I have these children's faces. And if he were alive today, there was another man that the Labor Museum put me in touch with, and I just missed it because he just passed away last year. And his wife wrote back to him. He did research on Lewis Hine's children also, and he found relatives of them.
Wow.
I know I can't ever remember his name. It's a senior moment I'm having, but I have it documented in my researches. But he found relatives of them. He was so interested in these photos. So eventually the Labor Commission hired Lewis Hine to go into these places and document what was happening. Mm-hmm. And my favorite story, and I'll make it brief, when I was in Millville, so many people came to me. I invited everybody, come and tell me your stories, because I became a storyteller then because of it. The same with the coal mines. People came to me and said, oh, my grandfather worked in this mine and my son worked in that mine. And it was amazing, the stories I heard. The best story I heard from South Jersey was this one woman came to me and said, and she wrote it in my book, that her grandfather was told when the inspectors came to hide in a rain barrel and they put a lid on him so that they wouldn't see that they were using children to work. Amazing, isn't it? This little guy had to hide in a barrel so the inspectors wouldn't catch him.
But it isn't lost on me, when people think about why is art important? What does art give as value? And in this case, through the photography, it's a documentation of history. Exactly. So that these voices are not forgotten, that these names can be learned.
Right.
Then you take it a step further, and through being this visual storyteller and historian, there's a lot of healing, because not only are you healing through giving the children the bright, colorful life that they should have had through your interpretation of their portraits, it's inviting what you weren't expecting, all of these conversations of families coming forward saying, that's my family history.
Right.
And how healing that is for them to see that in art, but also to talk about it, because I'm sure a lot of these things haven't been spoken about, not out in the open.
No, and that's why I targeted these places. I targeted the Pottsville area because, number one, that's where my grandparents were from. Everybody on my father's side lived in Mount Carmel at one point. My cousin Roseanne's family also. Mm-hmm. So I targeted those museums up there. And then I did this series on the glass-blowing children specifically for Millville. So I was pleased when the one gallery accepted it. And they were very pleased with the turnout. It was very successful. This if any artist does work specifically to make money, they're using the wrong idea, because none of these really sell. The prints, maybe, but a lot of people look at them and see the sadness in the eyes. And that's kind of hard to put in your living room above your couch. So a lot of times it doesn't sell, and that's not why I make it, for sure. But I have offered a lot of times with these museums, I'll come and talk about this anytime you want.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give a talk. I'll bring the school children in. I've offered that a couple of times, but nobody ever really took me up on it. But they did do a couple interviews with me up in the coal regions. People were interested there because that's their livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, some of them.
And speaking of museums, there is a piece from the coal mining series in a museum in New Jersey. If you want to give some information about that, if people want.
I can do that. Thank you. That was a piece called 3 Lives. And it was 3 little boys and the experience that they had with black lung. And I depicted the 3 boys with a film on their chest of the first 2, depicting the stages of black lung. And then the 3rd little boy, I painted with acrylic, obviously. I painted a respirator on him. And he didn't have a film with black lung on his chest, but the first 2 children did. I wish I had it in front of me, but anybody can look at my website and find it. So I submitted that. That was in several shows, actually. That got in Monmouth Museum, that got in the Ellarslie Museum in Trenton, and they ended up purchasing it for their permanent collection. And I was really pleased and surprised. But I was surprised. I'd never been to that museum before, didn't even know it existed. It's in an Italianate style mansion in this park in Trenton. And I went in there and they had this museum salon style, if most people know what that means, different colored walls in different rooms of a mansion. It was beautifully done. And I was just so pleased because they had hung that painting right in the first room in the first wall, because obviously somebody liked it a lot. Mm-hmm. So when I went to pick it up, they questioned me because I needed it for another show. So they said, well, how soon do you need? And I said, well, not till next year.
Yeah. Because
they said, we want to purchase it. I was very honored because now it's in a permanent collection somewhere.
Well, and it's a very moving piece because, as you explained, you're demonstrating, you're playing Russian roulette when you're in those jobs. You don't know if you're going to make it out alive. And then, as you said, you painted in acrylic the protection so that you could breathe. Well, they didn't have that. They didn't have that choice.
And I said that. Then that was the cruelest joke of all, because they weren't given respirators. That was my cruel twist on it.
Yeah, which speaks to the larger point that you're making, that these children were not protected and that they weren't.
Oh, no, not at all.
Yeah, so
it was very dangerous around 1908 because they didn't have electric lamps on the lights on their helmets. And they had a little metal thing that held coal oil with a wick, and they would light it. So you go in a mine, what I've learned, and from going in mines, you don't always go in a mine with a live flame because of the gases.
Yeah.
And that's what caused a lot of the explosions back when. So that's why the phrase canary in a coal mine, and maybe on my website, I have a painting I did of the canary with a respirator on. He was the canary out of the coal mine. I had fun with him.
Yeah.
But obviously they really did that. They took canaries in the coal mine.
It's just
the canary died. Then there were gases, so they couldn't work in that area. Can you imagine? I mean, not only do you have to worry about the coal falling on your head as you're drilling, but of the gas exploding. And worse, there was the Susquehanna River in this area of North Pennsylvania. The river would come in if you drilled too far in one area next to the river came in and flooded the whole thing. Yeah, I just was talking to somebody about that the other day. The Susquehanna River came pouring in the mine, and people died. The ones that escaped found an air vent and they climbed up it.
It's really insane. It's really insane.
Isn't it?
But
the stories.
But that's why the stories are important, because again, you can sit through a history class and you can get an overview, but it's very different when you get the details. And what piques your interest to delve further into the history and your country's history,
right,
is these visuals.
It's the visuals. With one look, you can see. I printed the lungs on a piece of film.
Mm-hmm.
That introduced me on how to print film out of my inkjet printer. You can do that. Woohoo, that was cool, because I found good images, with stages of black lung. My grandfather had black lung.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry.
Sure. Everybody did.
Yeah.
It was part of life. Well, I didn't know when my father passed away. My sister said, "Look at this. Dad had a compensation from the state of Pennsylvania for my grandfather's black lung."
Wow.
They were able to pass it down to my dad. It wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
But I think my dad stopped taking it. He didn't feel worthy of it, But there was evidence that my grandfather had. And that's the stories of today, in West Virginia and the Appalachian peoples. They're not getting compensated for their illnesses from the coal companies. I could go on and on about that. And I don't know as much about what happens there, but when I see something, I read it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to be informed. But the other thing I want to bring up too, when I have these exhibits, is that because I keep the written documentation of the children's names and what their job was, I make placards and put it by the painting so that people can read it and know who that child was and what their job was.
That's really important. We were talking about, in bringing these children to life in a way, and bringing the color and beauty, that you worked with so many different mediums. You were talking about, you like to put things on metal because it gets that kind of patina, that
it does.
Or working with cut glass, or you just brought up how you were like, oh, I can print this out on my printer with the lungs. Like
every day is a new thing.
So when because you are the multidisciplinarian, are there certain textiles or certain mediums that you enjoy working in more than others, or you just game for everything? What do you like?
I'm game for everything, but when I can use metal and glass, I'm happy. But if I can do an oil painting, I'm happy with that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, that was my first medium that I learned in depth, was oil.
So I think for you like the variety. You need to
like variety. Yeah, I do. I mix it all up. I'm in my home studio now because I don't have internet in my new studio in Matawan. But I have in this cabinet where my computer is here, there's shelves of glass and pastel and watercolor, and it just goes on and on. And under the printer over there are boxes of just all kind of handmade paper. That's another thing I'm addicted to, handmade paper.
Gorgeous, though.
I love paper collage. I've been doing that, and cold wax and oil. To me, being an artist there's no end.
Mm-hmm.
And being retired now and not having to work, which I did until last year, they found me and reeled me back in, and I was thrilled to do it. Somebody I worked with at the last job I had at the pharmaceutical company, Roche, they needed help. And I was more than happy to do it because it was working on something I really loved. I loved that job because I learned.
Mhm.
I learned from the scientists. They would tell me things about oncology.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, I loved that job. I was really sad to give it up. Um, but anyway, I still have friends and but somebody, one of the writers needed help with clinical trial design. Well, I was more than happy to do that. And that was a great job and I was grateful for it. But now it's over and, she's retiring too. We're all at that stage, but now it's like, okay, what am I going to do today?
Mm-hmm.
What will I work on? So I'm working on now a couple portraits for the mill children. I'm doing little girls
Wow.
Whose father stays home and loafs. When I was upset about that, I can't imagine. I just can't imagine. My father would never
No.
put us out to work. He saw what the mines did to his father.
Yeah.
My father lost his mother when he was 4 years old. He had to take care of his sisters and, take care of his father. And he had a stepmother, and then he didn't have her either. My father had a horrible life, but, he was the most grounded, kind, wonderful person we ever knew. We never knew about his hardships. He didn't talk about them. Didn't talk about them until we were older.
Yeah. He persevered and he showed true strength through his kindness,
He lost 2 mothers.
Wow.
All he ever wanted was a family. And then he was saddled with a crazy child like me that they didn't know what to do with because I was a terrible child. I just was always into everything. I don't know. I was not an easy child to have. My sisters were better. Thank goodness.
You're curious and you're still curious,
right. And don't try and shape me into something I'm not.
Exactly. And maybe it has a point, what am I going to be when I grow up? Maybe we should leave things more open, because again, if we're constantly trying to define ourselves and that's a set finite thing, how do you grow from that? Right. So maybe it's better. I'm still waiting to see what I'm going to be when I grow up,
Yeah. You're another one. It's wonderful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It was harder when I was in school in the early 60s or late 50s, really. I mean, everybody knows how old I am now. I was born during the First World War II, towards the end. But that was an interesting time to be a child. My father was away.
Yeah.
And I was the firstborn. And so my mother lived with my grandparents in Hershey Corporation Housing, right across the street from the factory. And yes, I love chocolate to this day. I love going to Hershey, but they don't make it there anymore. They make Reese's.
Oh,
The town that they don't make it anymore in Hershey.
oh,
I know. Isn't it sad?
that is sad.
Reese's family still own but Hershey bought it, but the Reese's, they still make Reese's outside of town near the medical center.
Okay.
But the Hershey's chocolate bars and things are not made. They're made in Mexico and things yeah, I know.
That's a shame.
Isn't it? But I was privileged to have been born in Hershey Hospital, which my grandparents lived seriously right across the street from the manufacturing factory.
That's crazy.
So being a firstborn, and being the child of somebody, who's serving their country, and my mother worked for the factory and my grandparents, they would just sit around and wait for me to do something. So they encouraged me to be incorrigible, I'm sure.
Maybe it was challenging then, but it ultimately was good to encourage you to do differently. Going from your home in Hershey to your home in Cliffwood Beach, you have also been very involved in Keyport. You were the director of the Art Society in Keyport at one time, and you brought up a little bit earlier that you learned how to cut glass as part of this project initiative that you did for Keyport. You have these beautiful mosaic benches that are water. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that project, what inspired you, and how you brought that to life.
That's an easy one, really. We were bequeathed with some money from the Harbor Society, I believe it was, and the Harbor Commission, excuse me, and Keyport. I didn't form the Art Society. Other people did, but I ended up being the president because I had been involved in art societies before. I'd been on the board of directors and, involved. Mm-hmm. So I knew how to run one. So I ended up getting the job. So we were looking for a way to spend this money. Excuse me. So I remembered someone had brought up a project about making these recycling bins with cut glass mosaics. And we had done that project then. But I remembered that there was this famous mosaic artist in Philadelphia named Isaiah Zagar. So I went up to visit him because I knew he did projects for other places as fundraisers here and there. And I was going to school in Philadelphia. My youngest sister was in college at the same time. So I spent every weekend in Philadelphia down on South Street where his museum is. So I knew of Isaiah Zagar. We'd gone there countless times. So I went to visit him, and he said for the $10,000 that we had, he would come down and guide a crew in doing mosaics. So some of the members built these structures out of board and wood. And then Isaiah came down and the whole community showed up. At least 20 people a day would show up and cut the glass. He would show us how to cut the glass and do these designs. And we did 5 pieces that were down on that waterfront, structures. And then Sandy came and knocked them all down. We think some of them were hit by the trailer that was there. There was a trailer there that, because there's a boat ramp and people would come into the trailer and pay to use the boat ramp. So there was somebody that actually saw the trailer hit some of them and it just knocked them down. We never found, like 3 of them went into the ocean and never. So I got busy and Mort got busy. And we got grants. And the first grant I got was from the Andy Warhol Foundation. I stood in the mailbox or the post office and went, "Oh my God, Andy Warhol just gave me $10,000." Well, then we got more funding from the Arts Council in Red Bank. Mm-hmm. They said if we joined with them, they stood to gain more funding from the oh gosh, I'm having a moment now. There was money. Let's put it this way. There was money for artists who had lost their work. So we ended up with $37,000. So Mort got busy, and with a team, we designed what we thought we wanted were those freestanding sculptures that would not be washed away again. And each of them weighs 14 tons apiece. So he and another couple people interviewed people to build them for us. We couldn't build such a thing. Mm-hmm. We had to hire somebody, but we had the money. Wow. And so we had a couple of glass artists. Catherine Galley was one of them. She had studied in Italy, and she was a mosaic glass artist. And between her and Isaiah Zagar, we just all figured it out, how to do it. And Grace Sharp would lay out the canvas designs, and we worked on it for 6 years. Wow. But I loved doing it. But it was a whole different way of doing glass mosaic. It was not something that a lot of people could just jump in and do. We had to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more of a struggle getting people to chime in and help. But there were dedicated people that did. I mean, to start naming names wouldn't be fair because I would miss somebody, and I don't want to do that. But there was a dedicated team, and not a lot of people, maybe a dozen, that would show up on a regular basis and work on them. It was not easy work. You were out in the weather, the wind and the rain and whatever. Sometimes we'd put up a canopy, sometimes not. So a lot of sunscreen, and a lot of literally blood, sweat, and tears, and that's why the tears come now when I see people throwing stones at them. I want to go throw stones at all of them. And when they sit and chisel at them, well,
they don't understand. That's a horrible thing, is that you want to make art accessible. And sometimes in doing that, it's in an open space for everyone to enjoy.
Right.
Not everyone respects their environment, let alone art, So
I know. And I'm told when you do public art, you have to expect damage. Well, I'm sorry. I don't accept that, There's a purpose to sitting there with your car keys and chiseling at the glass. And I know that's what people do, because you can see where you get under that and it'll flip up if you hit it hard enough. It's only grout.
Yeah.
We used expensive, flexible grout to weather, the elements, but, if you needed to chip it off, you can.
It's unfortunate. I'm sure that the people who enjoy it and respect it outweigh the jerks that are
right. But still,
it's frustrating, especially when it's again, you had an original structure that had been destroyed by Sandy.
Right.
You go through all of the work of getting the funding to replace that with something that's more permanent. Takes 6 years to do. And then you have people,
I know.
You have people that just don't understand what goes into it. But, that's true of a lot of art, as there are a lot of people that don't understand that it's not something like, I have a magical fairy wand and I'm just going to create art today.
Yeah.
That there is blood, sweat, tears, that it does take time, to do these things, and it is of worth,
Yeah, that's why I have that sign down there. I don't know how many people read it, but it explains, please don't damage it because of what it took to build them. Mm-hmm. But to this day, it's probably one of my greatest accomplishments. Mort always says that too, my partner. Mm-hmm. He said in all his career, he's most proud of that. Helping design those sculptures.
Well, they are beautiful. Anybody
beautiful.
They're down by the water. You cannot miss them.
Anybody that sees this video needs to come to Keyport and understand what we're talking about. I can talk about it ad nauseum, but until you see it.
Yeah.
And I still, for years, if I'm down there, I watch the people come and visit it and say, "Ooh, look at that!" And the kids climb on it, and that's fine. The kids can climb on it. Just don't throw rocks at it.
Yeah, no rocks around. So I know that you've got this exhibit coming up that will be talking more about the little girls who worked in the mills. And clearly there are so many more stories that you'd like.
Oh, there must be thousands, because that museum, we'll have to make a road trip. That museum is very interesting because there was a big rally there. Protesting, and the mills, they shut down the mills for months. And the children, that the parents had no means of an income, so they sent the children into Manhattan to be cared for because they couldn't feed them. There's stories there.
So that exhibit's going to be on Labor Day.
Labor Day is the opening.
Mm-hmm. The opening. So
they'll keep it for a while. They're giving me 5 rooms upstairs. It's a house called the Botto House. They were Italian immigrants that worked in the mills, I think. And their family gave the house then as a museum after the rally there. That's where they had the rally. If you Google it, you'll see that the labor rally of the cotton mills in Patterson. Just Google Patterson Mills and you'll find it. So there's rooms upstairs that they use as a gallery, and the rooms downstairs are as the people had them when they lived there with artwork. So they have a lot of exhibits there. There's several. They didn't even have an opening until this year when I first was approached by them last year. But anyway, I think in deference to them, I should do a few of the little girls and Mill children. There's so many heartbreaking photos, and I want to honor them by doing some. Those poor little kids.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have shoes. At least the coal mine kids had shoes. These children were barefoot, Corinne. I mean, on the machinery, they're standing on the cotton mills in their bare feet. I can't. I try not to think about it negatively. I just go on and try and make them pretty and colorful.
I'm excited for that. And I'm excited because I think that, with this series and with this inspiration that, again, you're giving back to the community. You are making people take a second look at history. You are giving voices and names to these children, and it's inspiring. But I know that, again, like you have other works and other projects, because again, that's just how you are. Besides this historical series that you will be thankfully continuing, are there other genres, stories, things that you want to try to explore that you haven't yet?
Not yet. It'll come. When sometimes I say, well, I don't want to work with these children's images anymore, but then here I am. I'm drawn back into it. But in the meantime, yeah, I love working with my cold wax and oil. Mm-hmm. I really like doing that. And I adore paper collage. And so I've done that. I'm working on the things that I didn't have time to do last year because of getting ready for the show in May. Mm-hmm. And, having other things, COVID, knee surgery, it goes on and on. It was a busy year. Now I have time.
So if people, you've mentioned your website. I also want to mention the Trenton Museum, where that is. If people want to see your work, whether it's online or in person, where can they find you?
I think the Ellarslie Museum is the place to start. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if it's online yet. The last time I checked, it was not. Mm-hmm. They buy a piece from their show every year, so I'm not sure where they display, but it's an interesting start.
Well, I'll check it out as well. Again, I'm going to put your website and also, information about the museum in the show notes for this podcast. Okay. But just for everybody as well, your website is?
It's MaryAnnMcKay.com.
So that should be very easy for people to remember. I'm going to put that in the show notes. I want to thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's great talking about it. I love talking about art, and I'm grateful to have you doing this project. And I thank you very much for your graciousness, and hope to see you soon. I will see you soon.
You will see me probably tomorrow.
Probably tomorrow. Yep, we'll be there.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Create Outside the Box. Please subscribe, rate, and share our podcast. You can listen to Create Outside the Box on Spotify, Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Check us out on our Creative Operations YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to watch our interviews. You can find and follow Creative Operations on our Facebook page and on Instagram at @CO_Creative Operations. For more information about Creative Operations, please visit www.creative-operations.org.